Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the IDP Heatseekers, brought to you by RotoHeat.com. I'm Kraig Rueth, and with me, as always, is Austin. We are on to episode 11, somehow already, of the season 3 of the IDP Heatseekers, and we're going to continue our NFL Draft rookie IDP coverage here. We got through the first 2 rounds, which was a little bit slower than we had anticipated. You see, we were hoping to do 3 rounds last week, but we're going to get through 3 and through a lot of the names in the later rounds here. Austin, how's Monday treating you?
So far, so good. Although it's a long week ahead, and it was a long weekend, but so far, so good. The month of May gets kind of crazy. The good news is, now that the draft is over, we've kicked off a lot of rookie drafts. Those have been really fun. Hopefully, you've gotten to the swing of those as well.
Yeah, I'm starting to have, unfortunately, not really many IDP rookie drafts. Most of them are in the leagues where everyone's just so excited about offense. It's offense only, but we do have some coming up. They're going to have IDP players that I'm excited about.
Nice.
You have any big takeaways from your rookie IDP draft so far of players that you have a lot of shares of?
I'm in 2 right now, and then I've completed 1. So one that I can speak on for I don't know, I think we did 5 or 6 rounds. And then these that I'm in now are about 6, 7 rounds each. So there have been some surprises. We'll touch on some of those today. We'll talk about some of the players that I've really found that I've liked the value in for where they're going, and others who feel like maybe they're going a little bit earlier than I like. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. In fact, I'm going to pull my draft up over here so we can kind of look at it in real time.
All right. Well, while you're pulling that up for names that we're going to touch on here, it's a reminder we got through the first 2 rounds. So we're at the very start of the 3rd round here of the actual NFL draft. And right at the start, for our purposes, it was an IDP. It was Zach Pickens, defensive tackle by the Chicago Bears out of South Carolina. So he played 4 years at South Carolina. He did all right, over the course of it. Nothing staggering in terms of tackle numbers or sacks, tackles for a loss, things like that. Just sort of steady increase of production from year 2 to year 3, and then continuation to year 3 into year 4. Sounds like they're kind of hoping he's going to be one of their defensive tackles of the future next to Gervin Dexter, who we talked about. Pickens is a little bit smaller than him. He's 6'3", 305, but he can sort of play the run stopper or the pass rusher dual role. I'm not as excited about him for IDP purposes, Austin, as it was Dexter for the potential with that high tackle floor. But how do you like Pickens there next to Dexter?
I really like him for his athleticism. I think he's and his size. He's really athletic for his size. He ran a 4.8 40, which was impressive for as big as he is of a guy. He is pretty explosive. He did some really good things at South Carolina that I like. The question is, how's he going to adapt to the NFL? Is he going to be able to get it? And the defensive tackle position is kind of tricky, especially in, IDP leagues where generally those players don't score as much. I think from a real football standpoint, I kind of like the play here. I like that they're, building from the inside out. He's a guy that, could create some disruption and let some of those other guys get off on getting around the edge, go and get tackles to the quarterback, things like that. So he is disruptive in the middle, and I like that. But I don't know that he's anybody that I'd be targeting in any of my IDP drafts. And in fact, I don't think he was drafted in the one that I've completed so far, or I don't think he'll be drafted in any of the 3 that I'm in currently.
Yeah, he'd have to be in a deep defensive tackle required league for you to even think about drafting him. And he's even probably in those leagues because the nature of the defensive tackle position, you could probably find someone that you trust a little bit more to get playing time right off the bat than taking a 3rd round rookie. So next guy we're talking about here is a guy that I actually really liked pre-draft, and unfortunately I really liked his landing spot post-draft. But it was a team that goes against my Dallas Cowboys. So at least I'll get to see him play. But Sidney Brown was a safety that went to the Philadelphia Eagles out of Illinois. I really like his style of play, and he was superb in coverage. He was one of the best in terms of coverage in college football last year. He was in college for 5 years, so a little bit longer. For those of you who know the offensive side of the ball, not as much for the IDP purposes, his brother, Chase Brown, twin brother, was drafted by the Bengals to be sort of Joe Mixon's backup, or perhaps heir apparent but he went there too, so it was cool to see them both get drafted. Sidney Brown is a little bit smaller in size, but he's very physical. He does have some issues, and concerns of tackling, being able to wrap up and make sure you're securing that ball carrier, but he's a smart player. He's always in good position. Like I said, he was great in coverage. And that landing spot, it's kind of wide open there. They have Reed Blankenship, who is undrafted free agent. They got Terrell Edmonds, who's just on a cheap one-year deal that came over from Pittsburgh. So Sidney Brown's going to have an opportunity, I think, to earn immediate playing time. But whether or not he gets that, I do think long-term he's going to get a shot to be a starter on that, superb defense right now for Philadelphia with a great offense. And I really like this position. How are you feeling about it?
Yeah, I really like Sidney Brown as well. And just looking at this 6th-round draft that we did, he was actually undrafted. And he'll be one of the players that I talk about that I like that kind of value when you can get a player like that, maybe in the 6th round or potentially even undrafted, adding him to your roster. Even just making him a taxi stash and seeing kind of how things go in Philly. But I like the defense that he's joined. I like the player. I like the potential here for him to get an opportunity early and for him to make a difference and be a fantasy contributor as early as potentially year 1. We'll see what happens, but potentially as early as year 1. And looking at this board and who was drafted, we may talk about some of these players or we may not, but I definitely see one on the list, a defensive back that was taken that I could make a case that maybe Sidney Brown could have been taken in the 6th rather than this particular player. So I don't know. I mean, I like the value on Sidney Brown this year.
Yeah, I agree. And you will have that chance, I think, long-term to get that spot along with immediately. It's just going to be a matter of can you clean up that tackling, because it's going to be important if you're in position to make the tackle. You're not able to because guys in the NFL, by and large, are bigger than what you faced in the Big Ten. Smaller guy. We've seen smaller guys succeed, like, Antoine Winfield is a recent one that comes to mind. It isn't a death knell just because you're a smaller safety, but certainly you got to make sure you're getting your tackles cleaned up at the back end there of the defense. And the next guy talking about is another favorite. You had sort of been a stan of his, if you will, right away when we got into our draft process. It was Drew Sanders going later than people thought he would. He went 67th to the Denver Broncos out of Arkansas. Super athletic guy, can play inside, can play outside. It sounds like Denver's going to try him on the inside initially here. That can change over the course of camps or even years. It sort of saw it with Baron Browning switching from outside to inside and that stuff there. But he's not in a great position. In fact, an article I'm coming out soon, I have Drew Sanders sort of listed as one of my guys whose stock is going down a little bit after the NFL draft just because of the landing spot. He's behind 2 IDP players that just got a ton of tackles last year. Josie Jewell finally being healthy. Then Alex Singleton, just a IDP tackle monster, got rewarded with a nice contract. So long-term, I like the position. It just stinks. And you talked about this a lot last week, Austin. Just not a lot of great landing spots.
Yeah, that's right. And I hear you. I agree with that. I actually kicked myself because I took Trenton Simpson in the 4th, later in the 4th, and I thought, man, I don't know if I like Trenton Simpson more or Drew Sanders there. Both kind of, we talked about it, didn't really get the absolute best landing spots. And I spaced on my own guy, Drew Sanders, who went in the 5th round. And I will say I like that value for him. I like that you can get a player like that in this class as late as the 5th round, who I still believe in the player and the talent. And the cool thing about it for him is that even though maybe he doesn't have year 1 production like he'd like, he's still the kind of player that when I look at this class, and especially when I look at all the different linebackers in here, position specific, I still really like him a lot. I mean, he's still a top 3 linebacker in this class, even though he didn't land, in the best spot. I could make the case that he's top 3, top 4, depending on how you have, your league. If he's considered a linebacker or edge rusher, that changes things, of course. But for true linebackers, I think he's arguably a top 3 linebacker in this class still, and I still really like him long term. So I'm still willing to, go grab Drew Sanders in these rookie drafts, roster him, and feel really confident for the long-term prospectus.
Yeah, long-term, I certainly like it. And, he is a guy that just didn't play a lot in college because he was a special teamer backup those first 2 years at Alabama, and then he was sort of bouncing around with how he was used at Arkansas. But he flashed that great potential, and if they are going to focus him on one area on the inside, but have the potential to get those sacks, because we have seen linebackers be successful getting sacks from the inside when they rush him too. I think that could be added value, and he's in a good situation to learn from a couple guys, especially if you look at Alex Singleton, that wasn't drafted highly at all. In fact, I don't think he was drafted. Don't hold me to that, but
No,
I don't think he was.
No, he was undrafted.
But he's carved out a great role for himself, as evidenced by that contract after sort of bouncing around and not being able to completely stick with Philadelphia or Denver. So learning wise and long-term value, I agree it's a good position for him.
Yep.
Next up here, not a whole lot in my mind to talk about. We had the first of two Byron Youngs going. The second one we'll look into a little bit more, but Byron Young, defensive tackle out of Alabama, went to the Las Vegas Raiders. You mentioned it as far as, earlier with Pickens being a better real-life pick than probably IDP. This is the same sort of thing. This Byron Young is just more of a throwback to closer of a nose tackle, just a big space eater to eat up blocks and help you in run defense, but not going to get you a whole lot IDP-wise. You seen anything else for him?
No, nothing really to add.
Then we had a cornerback going to Arizona, Garrett Williams out of Syracuse, so he went there. That would have been at pick 72. And going down to 75, we got another IDP we talked about on our Edge show, Zach Harrison, defensive end from Ohio State, went to the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons have been looking for a solid pass rush for a long time. They have Lorenzo Carter, who they had signed prior to last year, sort of at one spot, and then Bud Dupree, free agent signing that did well in Pittsburgh and then fizzled out large part due to injury with Tennessee and then just ineffectiveness this past year. Sort of looking like they're starters if the season were to start now. But they got Arnold Ebiketie, second-round pick, who they had drafted last year. They came on and had a decent end of the season, and it's a learning curve with any rookie, but especially on what was just a bad defense for Atlanta last year. He saw the field a little bit and kind of feels like maybe Harrison and Ebiketie, they're hoping, are going to be those long-term pieces. Harrison was that athletic specimen, tested really well, was a high recruit out of high school, just didn't produce a lot in the NFL. So probably not a lot of year one production here either, but how you liking that long-term potential in Atlanta?
I don't know yet, because a lot can change in the course of just even a year. We talked about this, with one of my other favorite guys, which was Malcolm Rodriguez of the Lions, how, just you could like someone and then the next year you couldn't. The problem is, going into this season, I wasn't a huge fan of Zach Harrison's. Currently, I don't love the situation, and I don't feel super confident that I'll love it in a year from now. So for me, I'm probably just out on Zach Harrison for this year. I don't see myself drafting him in any of the rookie drafts that I have coming up. But that's just, my opinion.
Yeah, it's a big edge class, so you can sort of dance around and pick the guys that you like and the ones that you don't, see if they fall a little bit farther.
Yeah.
Next one was a really interesting pick, a guy we didn't talk about at all pre-draft here at RotoHeat, and there's always a couple of these, but Marte Mapu, I think that's how you say it, out of Sacramento State, a very unheralded college. Of course, it's the Patriots. Patriots or the Raiders seem to be the teams that usually take one of these, what appear to be sort of off-the-wall swings. He played safety, by and large, there at Sacramento State. Kind of sounds like the Patriots are going to use him, which Bill Belichick loves to do, in that sort of hybrid safety linebacker role.
Mm-hmm.
He's done it with Kyle Duggar, playing up closer to the box more. He's done it with Adrian Phillips, who they had in years prior. Jabril Peppers has been used all over. Bill Belichick likes those really versatile guys that can play multiple positions. I read somewhere that there might be Kyle Duggar insurance if he isn't retained by the team going forward, since there's similar style of play. Position, how he gets labeled on your site will be interesting, so pay attention to that. But especially if he's a defensive back and he's playing sort of that hybrid linebacker role. Really interesting pick here. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I agree. And that's exactly what I was going to talk about. Was the interesting thing is Sleeper has Marte Mapu listed as a defensive back, which, anytime I see a defensive back who's lining up in the box or playing that more of like linebacker hybrid role, that's very attractive to me. I mean, that's, the same way with Kyle Duggar. I kind of, I've always gravitated towards Kyle Duggar as a player on my fantasy teams, just because, he he gets that usage where he can be moved into the box or he can play, out coverage. He's a willing tackler, a good tackler. And the same could be said about Marte Mapu. So long term, I mean, this is, and where you could get him in the draft, again, this is another 5th, 6th round pick. I would probably even say 6th, unless somebody just knows about this and says, oh, hey, this is an interesting situation, and goes and grabs him in the 5th, which actually what happened in my draft. I was kind of surprised that he went there. I felt like, he would have went a little bit later, maybe into the 6th round. But for that cost, I really like this player, and I like the situation, especially if you're on sleeper and he gets that defensive back designation, and if he can keep it.
Yeah, he's the guy that I'm going to be looking at taking that later round in drafts if you're able to, because even in the Twitterverse and Reddit, different places you can go, not a whole lot of talk about him. Certainly more than there had been. A guy's taken in the 3rd round there's a potential. Probably not going to be cracking a starting lineup this year, but I'm thinking 3rd round pick, probably going to be getting some playing time, and we're going to see where it takes him. And if he ends up going into next year having a shot at that starting role, that's where you're really going to be happy that you stashed him away on your taxi squad. Next is 77, the Los Angeles Rams. Our next, Byron Young. He had been more of a defensive end out of Tennessee. Kind of sounds like they're going to be trying him at that edge outside linebacker rushing position like they had with Leonard Floyd. Rams are going through a bit of a rebuild here. They haven't completely tore it down, but they've lost a lot of pieces. They're paying attention to Cap more. If you sort of go look at different depth charts for him, it kind of looks like Byron Young is going to have a really good shot to start there. Leonard Floyd is unsigned still. There's still a couple other edge rushers that could sign, but it's Byron Young and Michael Hoyt, who is, I think, an undrafted free agent in 2020. But he's looking like a guy there. Of course, they drafted Nick Hampton, who we'll talk about later in the 5th round out of Appalachian State. Got another rookie, Ochon Mathis. So a lot of youth in this linebacking core in general for the Rams. Mm-hmm. Good landing spot for immediate potential. How do you like Byron Young there?
I really like Byron Young with the Rams, and I love the value of where you can get him again in rookie drafts. This is a player who's an edge rusher who's going to get probably dual eligibility with linebacker and defensive end. I like the size. I like the explosion. I really always liked him coming out of Tennessee, but then the landing spot just, confirmed that. I mean, he's looking like he's going to be the starting left outside linebacker. He and Ernest Jones could be the 2 best linebackers on that team currently, which is pretty interesting. I mean, in a way that's like, I don't feel like he should be one of the 2 best linebackers on any NFL team, but he is currently. And so good for him. Good for Ernest Jones. I think these 2 guys could have really good years. And at cost, this is a very good player when you're going into your rookie drafts to try to target.
Yeah, and he could even have some potential redraft value there if he does earn that starting job and you got that edge position, or you're in a league where those big plays are rewarded. They still got Aaron Donald there, and we've seen, Leonard Floyd had one big year at Chicago, and then he sort of, continued that when he was in St. Louis there previously, and then Los Angeles, I guess. Maybe I don't even know if he was in St. Louis, but he was with the Rams is what I'm trying to say. So we've seen guys that maybe haven't done a ton of production previously have a good time there. So we'll see what that comes to. Moving through the 3rd round, DJ Johnson, outside linebacker from Oregon, going to the Carolina Panthers. A bit of a surprise that he went sooner than Noah Sewell, another Oregon linebacker that we're going to talk about. And DJ Johnson's a guy we didn't talk about a whole lot going into. His name might not have even come up either, so it was a bit of a surprise pick. But what do you think about him going there? And, Brian Burns is still trying to find someone opposite him as they transition to that 3-4 defense.
Yeah, he's a bigger guy. Obviously, playing behind Brian Burns is going to be an uphill battle. I really still like Brian Burns a lot. But this is a guy who 6'4", 260. He has a good frame, fairly athletic. I was also surprised that he went ahead of Noah Sewell. I think I would agree with you on that. I don't know that he even got drafted, to be honest, in the rookie draft we did here. So, again, this is 6 rounds, and no, I'm not seeing him anywhere on this list. So, interestingly enough, it's, if your drafts go anything like mine, potentially this is a player that you could look at picking up after your draft is complete. For me, I'm not targeting him in any drafts. I think that, again, we talked about this earlier with the edge position. I think you can dance around and find guys you like that, are either better long-term fits or potentially even give you better upside year one. And so I'm probably passing on DJ Johnson, though.
Yeah, even just depth around it. They have Marquise Haynes, who's been there a while. He was in 2018. He was a 4th-round pick. Yetur Gross-Matos, I really liked. He hasn't done a whole lot in the NFL level, though he's had a little bit of improvement each year that he's been in the league. He's a huge dude, and I don't know that he's actually going to be able to play an outside linebacker. Yetur's like 6'5" to 265, so similar in size to DJ Johnson. I think it'd probably be better off having him as a deep end and then 3-4. So we'll see how that plays out. There's just too much in front of him right now where I don't see the need to be drafting him. And kind of like your draft went, you could probably get him as a free agent and stash him if you really wanted to. Pick 82, we had Yaya Diaby, defensive end, now probably an outside linebacker from Louisville, going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tampa Bay is continuing to try to beef up that defense in general. We mentioned last week they drafted Kalijah Kancey. It sounds like it's going to be next to Logan Hall and then Vita Vea on the defensive line. And they, of course, have Shaq Barrett, who's seemingly going well in his recovery from last year. And then they got Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, who hasn't done a whole lot at the NFL level. Perhaps they're trying to push him or see what happens. But you can't have too many pass rushers. Curious to see if this guy went in your draft at all, Austin.
Yeah, let me check that out. I don't remember if he did. I don't know. He didn't either. So again, this is another guy who could fall outside of your drafts. You could potentially pick up after as a depth piece, a taxi stash. And I like the position he's in. I mean, he's second on the depth chart at left outside linebacker. Could be a rotational guy. Joe Tryon, we'll see how he does this year. But at worst, or I guess, yeah, probably at worst, I would say he's probably a rotational guy unless Joe Tryon just explodes. Otherwise, maybe you're right. He could potentially try to make a viable run at a starting left outside linebacker role. I don't think that will happen. I think Joe Tryon will still be ahead of him on the depth chart. But it is an interesting situation that you'll want to keep your eye on as this offseason progresses.
Got a couple linebackers coming up here right after Denver Broncos drafted Riley Moss, who is played cornerback safety. They're not really sure completely how they're going to use him there in Denver, but played most of his time at cornerback, and it kind of sounds like they're going to do that now. But keep an eye on him too. If he ends up, going into that safety position, we could end up pushing for a starting job down the line, but probably not a lot this year. Got 2 linebackers now. First one, Diane Henley, going to the Los Angeles Chargers from Washington State. So Henley, if you don't know a whole lot about him, we did mention him in our linebacker coverage. He was a converted defensive back. He might have even played wide receiver one year. I'm going off my memory here, but I think he played wide receiver, then a couple years defensive back. And he transferred into Washington State, where he had a really good year this past year. And as you imagine, for most of these guys that have been a defensive back prior, he is really good in coverage, especially going up against those running backs. An anecdote, if you didn't pay a whole lot of attention to draft coverage, Todd McShay reporting out of the Senior Bowl, they have different drills that they have, and one of them is where they have the linebacker going against the running back, in coverage, and most of the time the running back's going to beat the linebacker. And they said Diane Henley did so well just stonewalling these running backs in coverage that guys were tapping out. They didn't want to get involved with going up in this drill against him. And that's what Diane Henley is going to bring. He's still learning that true linebacker role, but he's got the coverage part down. Mm-hmm. Chargers have been looking for a long time at a solution at that linebacker position because they've had a whole bunch of different guys do all right for a year or so and then just not pan out. Mm-hmm. Went and got Eric Kendricks, who's going to be the guy for a year or two there. But I certainly think there's going to be a role for Henley right away, and long-term, he could pan out here. So I like this one.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like this as well. And I think that he's one of the most underrated linebackers at cost in this draft. Again, in this class, he went in the 6th round of my draft, and I felt like that was obscenely late compared to some others. If that's the kind of value that you're going to get for Diane Henley, whether it be because people just don't know about him or whether it be that people just skim over him because, the name doesn't jump off the screen or whatever, I don't know. something is wrong with that though, and I really like the landing spot like a lot for Henley. This really feels like they took Kenneth Murray in hopes of using the athleticism that he brought to the table to be able to do some different things with him and for him to be a versatile piece, and it just hasn't worked out. And Henley is different from Kenneth Murray in that Henley is more of a cerebral player than Murray is, in my opinion, but he's equally as athletic. So he gives him that versatility that they've been searching for a long time. I really like the fit here. I think that he makes a run for a job starting in year one, and I think that he could pay dividends for those who take him in their rookie drafts, especially if you're doing that as like the 5th or 6th round.
And right after him, you had mentioned prior, Trenton Simpson was a guy you drafted. He went 86th to Baltimore, linebacker from Clemson, sort of in a lesser degree that molded Isaiah Simmons was, where he sort of position played across that safety and linebacker position, although Simpson was more of a true linebacker. Patrick Queen's option has not been picked up by the Baltimore Ravens, so it kind of sounds like, we'll see what happens this year. They could certainly give him a shot this year, but definitely in year 2, he's going to get a shot to be a starter there next to Roquan Smith. Smith is going to eat up a ton of tackles, but do you see a nice future? You drafted him, so I'm guessing, you like the position there too.
Yeah, I like the long-term outlook on him. I mean, this kid's super athletic. He's a sure tackler, 4.4 speed, which is very impressive for any linebacker. I really like the fit with him alongside Roquan Smith long-term. I think it would make a lot of sense for the Ravens if they were to move on from Patrick Queen. Now they've got a player who can step in and they can feel confident in to fill that void where you don't always have that luxury when you're an NFL team and you've got a linebacker that you need to re-sign, and especially you've got one like Roquan Smith who's he's getting paid a lot of money. So having a young guy like Trenton Simpson who can step in and fill that void if they do move on, I think is a really great thing for them. It puts them in a great position and gives them leverage in that regard. So I like Simpson long term. I think that he could. I think that he could even challenge Queen for some reps early on.
Another one of your guys pre-draft here went right after that at 87 to the San Francisco 49ers. Jair Brown, safety out of Penn State. He went to a position too where I think he could end up pushing for immediate playing time if things go well in the lead up in the summer camps. They only got Tayshaun Gibson next there. He's on 1-year deal, I think, or 1 year left on it, around $2 million. So not a lot of money. He's an older veteran, in his early 30s. Of course, they got Talanoa Hufanga, who was a breakout safety last year. I think they're hoping that it's going to be Brown and Hufanga long-term there next to each other. Brown can play really both the positions well, but he's a solid tackler. He doesn't have top-end speed or anything like that, but he's a smart player that gets in good position. And again, it's we got sort of 3 in a row here, but I really like this IDP landing spot too. How do you feel?
Yeah, I like it a lot as well. And I think you're right. Tayshaun Gibson, currently listed as the starter. He's 32 years old, and he is declining. Now, with that said, he's a savvy veteran. He knows his way around the league. He knows how to play this game. And I think it'd be great for Jair Brown if he doesn't, even if he doesn't play right away, if he's not able to win that job, being able to spend a year, playing alongside Gibson and Hufanga, which I still think he can do. I still think he could find his way onto the field. Defenses are willing to run 3 safeties a lot more often. Yep. And I like the versatility that Brown brings, and it allows them to do that because, like you said, he is a sure tackler. He is pretty decent in coverage. He's not the fastest guy on the field, but he does a lot of things really well. And I think that that's going to give him a great shot of finding his way to the field in year 1. And so with that, I mean, again, he's another high floor player when you're looking at defensive backs.
Moving on, we got a guy that we didn't talk about going at 89th overall to the Los Angeles Rams, Kobe Turner, defensive end for Wake Forest. Kind of similar in size and also, motor to a guy like Aaron Donald. Again, it's not fair to really compare anyone to him, but he's going to have a good guy to learn from as he sort of tries to fit in that 3-4 defensive front as a defensive end. IDP-wise, probably not a whole lot of excitement for me right here unless he, breaks out and starts becoming something closer to Aaron Donald. How do you any thoughts on him at all? I'm guessing he probably didn't get drafted.
No, he didn't get drafted. Not very many defensive tackles or true defensive tackles, which did. And so I think Jalen Carter maybe being the only one, or maybe one more. But yeah, definitely was not taken in our rookie draft. And long-term perspectives, I don't know. I mean, it just depends on how long Aaron Donald sticks around. There's been rumors for, what feels like several seasons now of him retiring and moving on. And who knows if he ever will. But he's still a very good player at his position, still, going to dominate snaps on that team in the middle of that defense. So I think until he moves on, the path to playing time for these defensive tackles is going to be pretty sparing.
Then we got a couple more linebackers here. First one, DeMarvion Overshown, going to my Dallas Cowboys, linebacker out of Texas. He was a converted safety too, as far as going into college. He improved over time. He's a guy that certainly has the athleticism and the speed. Not a whole lot of room for immediate playing time there. They got a whole bunch of young guys with Jabril Cox, Damone Clark, sort of fighting for that third linebacker because Micah still does generally exist out there as a linebacker, even if he isn't being used as one for the most part. And they just went and signed Leighton Vander Esch to, I think it was a 2-year deal for some good money based on how well he did last year. Cowboys didn't use 3 linebackers a whole lot last year at all. So even if he does well, there's probably not a lot of immediate IDP playing time. But to me, what you're looking for here long-term is, can he learn the position, get the nuances down a bit more so that he can take over that inside position whenever they move on from Vander Esch. But not any real excitement this year for me. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, in the event of an injury to, one of the two guys that are, he could potentially be competing with, Jabril Cox or Damone Clark, who I think both, if I'm not mistaken, have had an injury history, correct?
Yeah, they have.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's that layer to this that maybe by way of injury, he could get into a good position and get, more opportunity than we expect. But I'm kind of in agreement. I wasn't really super excited with him as a prospect coming into this. I thought, the landing spot was actually not as bad as maybe it could have been. But I still just don't love it. And even long-term, I mean, again, this is somebody who can easily just be drafted over. Next year's draft, they can bring in more linebacker talent and he just gets pushed down the depth chart. So we'll see what happens this year, but shouldn't be going in any rookie drafts, in my opinion, that are anything that's 6 rounds long.
Next one does have a shot here to have some year one relevancy for us. Dorian Williams, linebacker out of Tulane. Another guy, and you're going to hear that trend probably throughout a lot of the rest of this. Guy we didn't talk about much, if at all, on shows, although I did have him in my rankings for a bit, and he moved up there with the draft capital. So again, linebacker out of Tulane, going to the Buffalo Bills, who lost Tremaine Edmonds and really haven't replaced him. They do have Terrell Dodson there and Terrell Bernard, who sort of split time when he was injured, or Milano. They still, of course, have A.J. Klein too, so it's kind of feels like you're going to have 4 guys fighting over one spot. But Dorian Williams was productive, especially towards the end of his career. He really showed up in the bowl game for him. Good linebacker in coverage. You can see him sort of fitting in there next to Matt Milano long term. I don't have a whole lot of excitement towards the idea of he's just going to come in there and earn the job right away and be what Tremaine Edmonds was for the Bills. That's not going to happen, but he's certainly a guy that I'm excited to draft probably in those mid-ish rounds for those IDPs and then hold on to see if he can earn that long-term starting role there. How'd you feel about this one?
I really like the spot and I really like the player. And I think that he could, in year one, make a push on Terrell Bernard, especially if there's any sort of injury in that linebacking corps. He should be the first one to step in. So I think that there's a good possibility that he does get more opportunity in year one, even than most might think. And I think that this was a long-term investment by the Buffalo Bills into their linebacking core. I think that by next year, he could be sitting in a starting role and could be a very productive linebacker for this team. I really like the player. So good pick.
Yeah, and if you haven't looked into him, go look him up there. While he was This past year, he had like 132 combined tackles, 5 sacks, a couple interceptions. Is the MVP of the Cotton Bowl. And he's not a huge guy for a linebacker, 6'1", around 230 pounds, but he held his own. And again, in today's NFL, you got to be able to hold your own coverage. And they have a good veteran team there where I do think that he fits in. I just wonder if they're going to defer to the veteran, especially to start the year, which they did a lot. Whenever there's injury, AJ Klein would come in like, oh, well, you can plug him in for some IDP production for you. So if I had to put my money on it, I think that's probably how the year is going to start. But we'll see.
Yeah, I would agree. I think at least for the start of the season, that's probably how it'll go.
Another one here. We got another guy. It's a safety this time that went to a nice spot for potential immediate production. Jordan Battle went 95th to the Cincinnati Bengals out of Alabama. My short synopsis of him was he did everything well. He did nothing exceptionally well. He was just a reliable, dependable guy that you could sort of plug in the defensive secondary and trust to do what's right, but not completely wow you. So they went and they got Nick Scott from the Rams. They signed him to a decent deal, apparently to be one of the safeties this offseason. Of course, they drafted Dax Hill last year. He played safety. He can play corner on the slot too. Generally, they're going to want to have their best guys on the field at the same time. If Jordan Battle does earn that, I could really see them playing these 3 guys at the same time and Battle having IDP relevancy this year. Mm-hmm. Guy that we weren't super excited about collectively at RotoHeat, but we were fine with. How do you feel about the landing spot?
I think he got a really good landing spot when you look at where all the safeties went, all the IDP players went, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And I think he did get a really good landing spot. And in fact, I felt so good about it that I drafted him at 609 in our rookie draft. So again, another late round guy, 6th round guy who, if you're looking to get safety help, he might be a good investment, both short term and long term. Playing alongside Dax Hill. Obviously, we know that Von Bell moved on, as well as I'm blanking. Help me out here.
Jesse Bates.
Yeah. So both of those safeties, the starting safeties in Cincinnati last year, they've moved on now. So that's really opened up 2 roster spots in the back end of that defense for people to step up and step in. And, they did bring in Nick Scott, like you mentioned, but, going and drafting a safety, I think they said, hey, we know what we got with Nick Scott. Now, can we get better? And they brought in Jordan Battle, and we'll see how that works itself out in this offseason. But he's definitely a player that I want to keep an eye on.
We got 2 more, really 3 IDPs, but the cornerback we don't talk about a whole lot. Broderick Martin went to the Detroit Lions at 96, the defensive tackle out of Western Kentucky. Not a whole lot there for me. They've drafted defensive tackles higher, in the first 3 rounds for a couple drafts here. With Dan Campbell, they really use a big rotation, so not a whole lot of excitement out of anyone on the defensive tackle position for the Lions. And then a guy that you liked, if you want to mention him, Siaki Ika, defensive tackle out of Baylor, going to the Browns. He could have some year 1 value if he does end up starting. They needed guys to shore up that run defense because it was abominable last year for the Cleveland Browns. Taking a guy like him, he could certainly do that for him. How you feeling about him round 1 for any guys in defensive tackle leagues?
Yeah, if you're in a defensive tackle league, this was a player who pre-draft I had circled at the defensive tackle position as being exceptionally skilled with his hands and his feet, and his athleticism, his balance. He did a lot of things really well for his size. Was very impressed with him on film. Very, very impressed. And I think that there's a path for him to win a job here and really get some significant playing time in year 1. So, and you look at who he'd be next to, Dalvin Tomlinson, who played for years at Minnesota. Now he's in Cleveland. And I think he's an excellent veteran to learn from. I really love this fit. And if you're in a defensive tackle league and you somehow feel like you need help, don't draft him because he probably doesn't need to be drafted.
Yep,
but if he's available there in the off season and you have an opportunity to go pick him up and maybe just stash him on a taxi or someplace like that, if you've got a really deep bench, maybe worth a shot. And could be a young guy who works out for you and you could keep around for a little while.
Last pick of the third round. I think this is the start of the comp pick area. It's the end of the third round, that is. But Mekhi Blackman, Minnesota Vikings took the cornerback out of USC. Into the fourth round, Jacorian Bennett. Sorry, I haven't read all the cornerback names ahead of time. Went to the Raiders, cornerback out of Maryland. The rich get richer seemingly with Philadelphia taking another guy from Georgia, Keely Ringo. He had been talked about as a potential first-round pick early on in the draft process. He fell to Philly in the fourth round at 105. Next up, for any potential IDP relevancy in most leagues, Houston Texans at 109 took Dylan Horton, defensive end out of TCU. Of course, they're going to have Will Anderson just plugged in immediately as one defensive end, and then they're going to see what they can figure out because they still got Jerry Hughes, still got Jonathan Greenard. Now they got Dylan Horton here. Not a guy I had a huge level of excitement about going into this, but certainly he's going to a position where they don't have anyone besides Anderson blowing the doors off. So he could end up coming into some relevancy, especially if he's going to end up starting down the line across from Will Anderson, who's going to have attention paid to him. Anything exciting to you about the spot here?
I think I like the spot for sure. I think he got pretty lucky here with his landing spot, and it'd be interesting to, we want to keep an eye on him and see how it goes. He could potentially be a sneaky play, probably again outside of your drafts, but a sneaky play in the offseason.
Next guy up here is he was a defensive end in college more so, though he played both a little bit. And now he's going to be, it sounds like, a defensive tackle for the Indianapolis Colts. They got Tomiwa out of Northwestern. And he's in a position too, great spot to learn from. Without injury, there's no way he's getting on the field right away because they got DeForest Buckner and they got Grover Stewart, who are both great for defensive tackle leagues. Last year. So he's going to have two good guys to learn from. I really like the player, super athletic. I just don't see him getting on the field much right away as a defensive tackle. So long-term, great. Keep an eye on, write the name down. Probably not worth getting drafted, but you like the landing spot long-term there, Austin?
Potentially, I don't know. Potentially. DeForest Buckner's been around for a while, but I like the athleticism. I like his ability to play inside out. I think that was one of the things that, watching him in college really stood out to me. And I got really excited about when I saw, him play. So I actually I wanted to see where he was going to land because I was like, I feel like this is a good enough player that if he gets in the right spot, this could have big implications for, especially the edge rush position or even potentially defensive tackle plays. I don't love it year one, but I do think that it's possible he could see the field a little bit here and there as a rotational piece.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these guys are going to see the field at some point, but if they're mainly out there to spell a breather or, garbage time for the starter, for our fantasy purposes, it just isn't going to help us a whole lot.
Yeah, unfortunately.
All right. Now I'm pretty sure we got more cornerbacks. Yep, Clark Phillips III going to Atlanta. He was out of Utah. Colby Wooden went to the Green Bay Packers, defensive tackle. He's listed out of Auburn. He's going to be on that 3-4 defensive front. They have Kenny Clark still, and they just drafted Devontae Wyatt in the first round last year. Fine depth piece, even if he ends up being one of the starters in the 3-4 down the line. Not a whole lot of excitement there for me, even in defensive tackle leagues. Any thoughts on him for you?
No, I think I've talked about him before. I thought he played a little bit high, didn't always win the leverage battle. So not really anybody I'm targeting for my rookie drafts.
And before we go even further into the round here, I want to thank you all for watching us over on YouTube or listening to us on the podcatchers after the fact. If you haven't already, make sure you like and subscribe over on YouTube. Hit the notifications so you know when we're going live. The Dynasty Heatseekers Fantasy Buffet. And if we're on your podcatcher, go ahead and rate and review us, letting us know what you like about the show, if there's things you'd like us to improve, or anything we can do to help you out. This one, when it came up on the list, I was interesting to see because I knew very little about him going into the draft. But going to Kansas City, Jamari Connor, safety out of Virginia Tech. at pick 119 in the 4th round. As a Chiefs fan, I'm sure you know more about him by now than I do. How you liking him there?
I don't know. I think this is a defense that needs a little bit of help on the back end, a little bit of security. So I do like him in that regard. After watching a little more tape on him, I've sort of come around on him, and not just because he plays for Kansas City now, but I think it's a decent pick. I don't know. I mean, I didn't think it was the best pick for safety. I thought there were better safeties on the board right here where he got picked personally, but that's why they get paid and I don't for this. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with them. I'd love to be excited about it as a Kansas City fan. But I think it's one of those things where we're going to have to wait and see. I mean, Brian Cook, Mike Edwards, Justin Reed, those should be your top 3 safeties. And then even probably Deion Bush. I think I probably like, I don't know, maybe similarly to Shamari Connor, but we'll see what happens with Connor this year. We'll see if he's able to impress the coaching staff. I don't think he's going to be on the field right away or be a fantasy contributor right away. But we'll see what Kansas City does with him, and if he's relevant in the future. I'm probably not rostering him. I'm probably not drafting him in my rookie drafts. Definitely not drafting him. But I don't even know if at this point I would be rostering him, because I think he's just a little bit too far down the depth chart for me. I feel a lot of confidence in the 3 guys, almost 4 guys that I mentioned ahead of him. So for me, that's just a little too far down.
And we're going to probably go a little bit quicker as we get towards the end of the show here to get through more of these guys. There's a lot of these guys are going to be depth pieces. For example, this next one up here, even Ventrell Miller, pick 121 to Jacksonville out of Florida, inside linebacker. We talked about shows earlier this offseason, how it's a little bit crowded there. We're not sure how it's going to play out. He's easily at least 4th on the depth chart, behind Chad Bouma, Devin Lloyd from last year, and Foye Oluokun. I don't see him getting drafted in most leagues, being behind those guys. Even if there's an injury to one of them, you got a great 3rd guy there already. So any thoughts on him? Because I know you had some interest in him pre-draft, depending on where he went.
Depending on where he went, I don't really love the landing spot. So for me, again, probably not somebody that I'm interested in rostering at this stage.
And I'm going to go through the end of the 4th round here, just naming off the IDP players. And then I'll let you pick out any of them that you have interest in talking about. Because, again, a lot of these guys are just clear backups right off the bat here. 126 to the Browns, we had Isaiah McGuire, defensive end out of Missouri. At 129, we had Viliami Fehoko, defensive end to the Cowboys out of San Jose State. Jacksonville Jaguars at 130 right after that took Tyler Lacey, defensive end out of Oklahoma State. Pittsburgh Steelers took outside linebacker Nick Herbig out of Wisconsin at 132. Jay Ward went to the Vikings, safety out of LSU at 134. And that's it for the 4th round. So again, Jay Ward, Nick Herbig, Tyler Lacey, Viliami Fehoko, Isaiah McGuire, and I guess I forgot 2 guys. Sorry. Tavius Robinson at 124 went to Baltimore, outside linebacker, and Seattle took Cameron Young, defensive tackle, who, again, probably not worth being drafted in most leagues at 123. But I know there's a couple names there that we've brought up before. So which of those guys sort of tripped your trigger landing spot wise?
Do you want to take a guess?
I didn't want to presume, but my guess, if I had to put money on it, was going to be Tyler Lacey. Yes.
Yeah. Would you agree?
Out of those guys, as far as immediate potential, yeah, I do like long-term Nick Herbig in Pittsburgh. He's got some good guys to learn from there. Jay Ward, same thing at safety. I could see him getting a role there, but these probably aren't year 1 things where Lacey, just with what they have in that sort of defense, I could see him earning a spot there, towards the end of the season. Yeah.
Yeah, which is interesting because I talked about it before. I love his leadership. I love the way that he plays. He's a high motor guy, which I've always, gravitated towards. I like the pieces that he has around him. So I think it always helps when you have good players around you to try to be a good player yourself, where you're not being asked to do things that you're just not prepared or capable of doing. Now, Tyler Lacey still is what he is. He was drafted in the 4th round, of course. We're talking that here. But I like the landing spot and I like the player. I'm certainly not drafting him in rookie drafts. And again, it's a player that you just want to keep your eye on as the offseason progresses. And, if you need some help or you want a young stash piece, it could potentially be a good defensive end edge rusher for you to try to add to your rosters.
Going into the 5th round, right off the bat, we had another player to the Jacksonville Jaguars, Yasir Abdullah. He's more of an outside linebacker, edge piece, similar to Josh Allen, Trayvon Walker. KJ Henry, defensive end out of Clemson, went to Washington. Skipping over the cornerbacks and defensive tackles even at this point. We got Jamie Robinson, safety out of Florida State, going to the Panthers. Jordan Howden, safety out of Minnesota, going to the Saints. And then a guy we talked a little bit about earlier, I want to get your thoughts on this landing spot. Noah Sewell at 148, far fall from the day 2 pick. A lot of people thought he went to the Chicago Bears, which not a great landing spot, it feels like, in the next probably even 3 years for him, unless there's some sort of big injury or something.
Possibly. Although, are we sure about Jack Sanborn?
No, I just don't know that 3rd linebacker is going to have a ton of IDP value for us, given that the other 2 there are Edwards and Edmonds, who I have to imagine are going to eat up the majority of the tackles. And if you're starting 4 linebackers and a couple flex or something, don't dump Sanborn now and don't just, never pay attention to Noah Sewell because of that. Again, most leagues, I just don't see that 3rd linebacker having a whole lot of value itself. So who has it there, it doesn't matter a ton to me.
Yeah. Yeah, Edwards and Edmonds both, what did they have, like 300 tackles apiece last year? Something crazy.
Yeah, insane.
So, I don't know. We talked about those guys before. I don't know that that's sustainable for both of those guys, but it certainly eats a lot of those tackles up when you know that you've got 2 guys who are highly productive in that regard. So, I kind of agree. But I am interested in seeing how that works out. And then long term, what they do with Edmonds and Edwards. Obviously, they paid those guys a lot of money, so they should be around for a while, but we'll see.
Going down the line, so Mike Morris, defensive end to Seattle, not a whole lot exciting there. This next one could be another guy we didn't talk about pre-draft, Servassier Dennis. He was a linebacker out of Pittsburgh. He's not going to start this year, so don't get your hopes about finding a gem here, barring injury. But with Devin White having the trade demand, supposedly, Levante David, the ageless wonder he's turning into at linebacker, crazy productive, but getting older. Who knows how long he'll be there. This guy in the 5th round out of Pittsburgh is going to have a chance to be one of those backups, and you fight for a spot long-term when they move on from one or both of White and David. So, again, more of a stash. Pretty much all of these guys are going to be, but this is an interesting one for a guy we didn't talk about pre-draft.
Agreed. And that's where I'll leave it, because I'll be honest, if I sat here and pretended that I did my study on him, I'd be dead wrong. And so, he may be worth a look now, post-draft. Like you mentioned, he did get a decent landing spot. So maybe somebody for me to check out.
A guy I know that we did talk about that really surprised me how far he fell to, Antonio Johnson out of Texas A&M, safety, going to Jacksonville at 160. Jacksonville has a crowded safety group just right off the bat. They have, off the top of my head, they have Wingard, they have Daniel Thomas, and then starters, I think it's Cisco and probably Rayshon Jenkins again. So it's going to be tough to crack in there. But long-term, I could see him being a player that ends up starting and having value, because I haven't seen or read a whole lot about why he fell that far. Pretty much everywhere pre-draft had him in that day 2 conversation. And, this can happen for a number of reasons, but don't give up on a guy like this that you liked pre-draft just because he had a bad landing spot. Make sure you're keeping the name, and if you got a stash spot, again, another guy who could come out of seemingly nowhere for those people that don't do the pre-draft work and get a spot. But you hear a whole lot about why he fell at all?
I'm not sure. Looking at NFL.com, athleticism score is a 59. I don't think he had a great broad jump. He had a 31-inch vertical. He only had 8 bench press reps, and he ran a 4.52. So,
not great testing.
Yeah, not great testing. And that could have been part of the reason. But when you look at the play on the field, and you looked at the film, this was another guy that just jumped off the tape. And to think of him playing next to Andre Cisco, who was another guy who I really liked watching him play in college, really jumped off the film whenever you put it on. I think that I would like to see that combination I mean, Rayshawn Jenkins is the veteran. He's going to be in there playing. He's done a really good job the last couple of seasons. So I don't think there's any reason that he won't be on the field anytime soon. But if they decide to part ways with him, I could see maybe Antonio Johnson making a case to win the job over Andrew Wingard.
We're going to go down a bit here. Just a name to keep in mind, too. Nick Hampton, linebacker, outside linebacker out of Appalachian State, we mentioned, going to the Rams. D3 school, he was really productive, but that's a big jump up in competition, so we have to see how he fits there. But 168 Arizona took Owen, I think it's Papo, linebacker out of Auburn. Really interesting spot where it kind of sounds like they didn't pick up the option for Simmons for one. Zayvon Collins are trying him sort of at that outside linebacker position. They got Kazir White and not a whole lot else there. Could be some long-term potential. And even year one here, if he starts standing out, any thoughts on that one or where he went in your draft if he did? You're on mute, I believe, still.
Good point. No, he didn't go in our rookie drafts.
Okay.
I mean, again, this was only 6 rounds long, and it wasn't super deep at linebacker. I think total when you count edge rushers and everything. So like the Will Andersons and Tyree Wilsons, I think there were maybe 8 or 7 linebackers. So.
The landing spot I like there, and a guy to keep tabs on for potential production. Another name worth mentioning, Christopher Smith II, another guy that some places had potentially going really high in the draft. He fell to 170 in the 5th round to the Raiders. Raiders are always trying to find secondary help. They're always drafting guys pretty high and just recycling through them. So he's a versatile player back there. He's played in big games. He's got a lot of experience. He's got to keep an eye on to see how that goes. But another safety we wanted to get your thoughts on here. One of your guys fell, and a guy that I like too, sort of after you brought the attention to him, JL Skinner, big dude. And we're talking like 6'4" and built, big dude, safety out of Boise State, going to the Broncos in the 6th round at 183. Probably not going to get a lot of year one playing time being a 6th round pick, but it is sort of open next to Justin Simmons there. So do you have any hope of him carving out a role this year?
I do have hope. I'm not sure how it's going to shake out, but I do have hope. And especially, again, when we talk about it, the NFL is a violent sport. Injuries happen. And if that's the case, potentially he could see himself get a shot. And so I really like JL Skinner here. Another name, I don't think we're going to get to if we're just doing draft coverage here, though. If you look on this depth chart sitting right behind JL Skinner, another guy who I really liked a lot, Devon Matthews. So I don't know. That makes things a little bit interesting for JL Skinner, to be honest.
Yeah, and Matthews, of course, was it Monster Matthews was his nickname out of Indiana there?
Out of Indiana, Monster Matthews. Yeah, I mean, so he's a violent player and one that I really liked. And to see them both go to the same spot, again, we've talked about it at length through several shows now. It's like the draft stunk in that regard.
Yeah,
so many
really
players.
did.
We were like, what is going on?
Not a whole lot else even for IDP players in the 6th round here. There were some defensive tackles, safety like Jarek Reed II went to Seattle out of New Mexico. He was an interesting guy, but a landing spot where they have Love, they have Quandre Diggs and Jamal Adams ahead of him, so probably not much going on there. And we start getting down into the comp picks for the 6th round. The only one really excited me here, D. Winters, San Francisco 49ers linebacker out of TCU. He can sort of play an edge rusher. He can sort of play a linebacker. Some potential there. For whatever reason, 49ers linebackers are always dinged up, and they're always having some of these backups play at some point in the year. Of course, they have plenty of guys ahead of him already, but a name to keep an eye on long-term there for the 49ers. And I'm not going to go through the whole list, but anyone in the 7th round that had a lot of interest for you that you wanted to mention?
Let's go through the 7th round real quick because I only remembered the first 6 pick by pick. So Let's.
I'm going to throw a couple names out there while you're looking at it. I'll give you some time to look. It's a couple safeties because a lot of these guys were safeties and defensive backs taken here. Jason Taylor, the second, one of your Oklahoma State guys, going to the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams need all sorts of defensive backfield help. They don't have a whole lot back there in general. So he was a guy, from what I looked at and what I read about him too, hardworking, great effort guy. People love to be around him and just always making plays, whether it was on special teams or when he was out there on defense. So I like the makeup of him and the landing spot, again, because a lot of these guys, if they're going to have any shot, it's going to be landing spot based. I liked him. And then Anthony Johnson Jr., safety out of Iowa State, going to the Packers. Packers don't have a whole lot at safety either. They have Darnell Savage as one of them who almost was just cut from the team with how badly he was playing, and he reinvented himself a bit by playing a lot more slot corner, and he's still penciled in for one of them. And then I forget the name of the guy that they brought in. Anyway, they don't have a whole lot of draft capital in any of these safeties on the team there. So he's a guy that would have a chance to stick, that played cornerback for the most part and then switched to safety this past year at Iowa State because they needed him to. And he played well there too. It's just the positional switch, and then his testing numbers didn't look as good at safety. But he was a guy that I was interested in, and I think that was the two of them for me.
Yeah. So looking at the first player you talked about, and again, I feel this is so weird how this happens. This is so weird.
Remember it for next year, everyone. Any Oklahoma State guys, you got questions, ask Austin about them.
You gotta be kidding me. No, I really like this. I mean, he finished with 99 tackles in 2022, three and a half tackles for loss, 6 interceptions, 7 passes defended, and a fumble recovery. I mean, he played a great year in 2022 at Oklahoma State, and he comes from a lineage. Obviously, Jason Taylor, if you don't recognize the name, his father was an NFL pro. He comes from a lineage that's been around for a little while, and he's athletic. He's not afraid to tackle. He's got good size. You look at what he did. I mean, he ran a 4.5 40, which, okay, not the fastest, but he had a 43-inch vertical, as opposed to Antonio Johnson, who we talked about earlier, who I think had like 31. I mean, that's a huge difference. His broad jump was almost 11 feet. 10 foot 9 inches, where I think Antonio Johnson's was only in the 9s. So 14 bench presses compared to 5 for Antonio Johnson. So it's interesting. The production score, the only thing here that I will say about Jason Taylor is he didn't have that kind of sustained production. Only 48 tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, which was better. 2.5 sacks and 2 interceptions in 2021. Not terrible. But then 2020 and 2019, he did virtually nothing. So he does have limited experience, limited production. But when you look at the testing, I mean, his athleticism score is an 81. His overall score was a 70. He was the 6th best, safety in the class in terms of athleticism score. So I don't know. I really like this kid. I like the landing spot for him quite a lot. He's somebody that I will be keeping an eye on as the offseason progresses. Again, probably not going to roster him right away, but you look at where he stands in this depth chart. I mean, he's second behind Russ Yeast, who, I'll be honest with you, I don't even know who Russ Yeast is. He was taken last year in the 7th round, so maybe shame on me if I don't know who that is. But I just think it's going to be interesting watching if Jason Taylor is able to win a starting job in year 1, or potentially year 2. And be a contributor for fantasy purposes for the Rams. And he's somebody who you should honestly be able to get like into the 8th round of your fantasy drafts. If your drafts go that far, if your rosters are that deep, and if they are, and you need, help at the safety position, he's certainly worth giving a look to, just based on his production and his profile. And the fact that I say he's a good sleeper. Trust me.
Yeah, I liked it too. I mean, like I said, they don't have a whole lot at safety at all. And, when it's a bunch of late round guys sort of going up against each other, they're probably all going to get a shot at some point this year, unless they go out and trade for someone or, sign a big name or relatively big name at this point in the process. So that's going to do it for our IDP rookie coverage here. We sort of ran through the last few rounds. But again, most of these guys aren't going to matter for your drafts right away and maybe not matter at all until a couple of years. But we do have a question here in the chat out of Justin. So thanks, Justin, for tuning in to us. Are you able to touch on the safety position in Washington? And certainly we are. So they have Cameron Curl and Derek Forrest, who are pretty much the starters last year. Curl was a 7th-round pick in 2020. Forrest, 5th-round pick in 2021. Both productive and both relevant last year for IDP leagues. And I'm guessing this is why he wants us to bring it up. Then they go ahead and throw that wrench in the works of drafting Jartavis Martin in the 2nd round this year. And, of course, they drafted Emmanuel Forbes, a cornerback, in the 1st round. So they're really paying attention to this defensive secondary for the Washington Commanders. I guess to me, just I haven't read a whole lot into it, and get the scuttlebutt out of that Washington area on it. I would think they're looking at having Curl and Forrest still start again. 2 productive guys that graded out pretty well. They were productive, cheap contracts. Martin can play pretty much all over like he did at Illinois, and I think he's a guy that they're going to be able to use at nickel cornerback. And then you also have to think Washington used 3 safeties a lot the past 2 years, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I looked it up at one point, and when they had Bobby McCain there, they were one of the teams playing 3 safeties the most in the NFL. Now, was it because their linebackers weren't great? Yeah, it could be. Cole Holcomb was hurt. Jamin Davis wasn't showing a whole lot. They had old man John Bostic there sort of as the de facto guy in the middle for a while. I don't know that it's going to be that much different this year. Jamin Davis did show improvement last year, and hopefully he takes a jump forward this year. Cody Barton, he was productive for IDP purposes in Seattle last year, but he's going to a new team, and he was bounced in and out of the starting lineup because just effectiveness of this play in the field, it wasn't great. So I think they're just trying to sort of maintain the status quo of allowing them to have 3 safeties on the field at one time. But what do you think about that? Because it was odd to me that they took Martin that early.
Yeah, Martin is a really good coverage player. Just so we're clear on that. I mean, 11 passes defended in 2022, 6 in 2021. He wasn't the best tackler. I mean, he had 64 total tackles in 2022, 56 in 2021. I think he's going to be better fit here as more of a coverage play. And I like, his pairing with Emmanuel Forbes as well as Kendall Fuller. I think that gives him 3 pretty good corners that should help Derek Forrest, who, is probably going to get pushed out of a job eventually. This secondary still needs help. But I like Cameron Curl. I think he's as a long-term starter still. I think the team's going to commit to him. And then they're giving those guys as much help as they can on the front lines of this secondary. So I think with those 3 being more of the coverage plays, more of the guys who can play up on receivers and do that kind of thing, it should help Derek Forrest. But I do think he does keep the job on the back end of this defense for at least this season. And then beyond that, I probably wouldn't have much confidence that he's going to remain the starter.
The other thing to take into account when you're talking about these guys, whether it's this year or long term, Cameron Curl's a free agent after this year, and he is I think again, like I said, a 7th-round pick. He's going to be looking to make money, and he should. He's been a great safety for him, and someone's going to be willing to offer him a lot of money if he keeps it up for another year here. So maybe they're just covering themselves like, all right, maybe we don't think we're going to be able to, or we don't want to pay Cameron Curl what he's going to command. We got an option here to back him up and play next to Forrest. So we'll have to see how it plays out, but I don't think there's any reason to think right now that Curl and Forrest aren't going to be your day 1 starters.
Yeah. I would like to see Washington retain Curl. I really would. And then, maybe go try to get another safety in the draft next year.
Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for the question, Justin. And that's going to do it for us. That's our rookie coverage recap here at RotoHeat.com for the IDP Heatseekers. Next week, if you have interest in joining us, we are going to be throwing together I believe it's going to be 1 QB, but it's going to be offense and defense mixed rookie draft for the 2023 rookies to kind of give you a feel where some of these guys are going. We'll see how many picks we can get through. We'll probably try to set it up for 5 or 6 rounds. That way there's plenty of those IDP players included in there. But Austin, any final thoughts on tonight or this rookie draft class?
There were some interesting picks in this class who went later than I thought, who went earlier than I thought. But I think that we pretty much touched on all the major ones tonight that you need to know about from day 3 to day 7. Hopefully we were able to help you guys out. You're able to grab some names from this of guys you like, maybe guys you don't, maybe guys you need to look into more. We thank you as always for stopping in. Of course, we appreciate everyone who follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, all the places. We appreciate you guys so much. And we look forward to next week with you guys. It's going to be a fun one.
All right. Well, have a great night, everybody, and we will see you next time.